Garrett Blevins here with an overview of the last couple weeks in training, actually, weeks 4 and 5 of the second cycle I did. Unfortunately, I've been out for a little bit. I had a little bit of a back injury. You'll see that at the end of this video. And while I don't think it's going to be too serious, it's definitely kept me out of training. Probably missed the last 3 or 4 days. And, sometimes that just happens. I was kind of frustrated by it because I had been having some pretty good progress before that. You'll see here a 655 at probably RPE 9. This is pretty good for me. May have been maybe an 8.5. It moves pretty well, but in any case, had made some really good progress on my squat, and I'm hoping to be able to manifest that in the next competition that I do. One of the things that I changed in my programming and that I've realized, for those of you who don't know, I've been working with Brandon Campbell with a group of just a little over 100 people running through a program that works off of AMRAPs. And pretty much what happens is your AMRAP performance on any given day determines your working weights for the next week. The reason it uses AMRAPs is really to help push up volume. Volume will magnify whatever training effect you are working with. So if you're working with a bunch of high reps and you do more volume, it'll magnify the effect of those high reps on your system. Same with low reps, and so you can be training different proficiencies in lifting, and you'll magnify that effect by how much volume you do. It's one of the best ways to make some really good progress, especially if you've been stalled out on lifts. But it also can be difficult because as you push volume, you always run the risk of overtraining and outstripping your recovery ability. I was rereading an article, I think it was on the RTS forums, and Mike Teixeira used an analogy. He talked about how if you think of your ability to, handle fatigue in your body as a sink, and the water running into that sink is your fatigue, you have a certain drain. And as you do more volume, more work in a workout, you're pouring more and more water into that sink, but it can only drain so fast. And that's true. But the way that he modifies this metaphor is that the way you train as a novice, or when you're a novice rather, when you're training, your drain is pretty small. And so it takes a long time for the water to drain out of the sink. But as you become more advanced, the drain gets bigger and bigger. Your body gets better and better at clearing that fatigue. And so you need to incur more fatigue to have an actual training result. The training result being kind of like how full the sink is to a degree. That's kind of where metaphors break down. But you want to be able to process fatigue so that you can magnify the training effect that you are having from your training and not overtrain. But at the same time, you can also get so advanced and kind of make your drain so big that you can recover from a lot of volume and not really have much of a result from it because your body has adapted to that stimulus. It's one of the reasons that I think almost reassociating yourself with volume can be a good thing. And it's also why, if you've been doing a bunch of really heavy intensity, low volume work, it's great to take some time off, work on some variations, and do some really high rep work. Here you see some of my lighter work during the week. I did some 7s with high bar and just kind of played around a little bit. I don't know if 455 for 7 is a PR or not, but it felt pretty good on this particular day. This was early in my kind of quote-unquote deload week. Which was not much of a deload. I pushed the intensity and deloaded the volume. Anyways, back to what I was saying. Fatigue is an interesting thing, and it's very dynamic as your body systems recuperate and adapt. Volume can be difficult to assess, and one of the things that I've been working on, especially in the last 2 or 3 weeks, is finding ways to address that issue. Finding ways and looking at what other coaches have done to address the volume problem as I look at it, because volume really is a problem that needs to be solved if you're going to have optimal training. And while it's good to have a starting point, it's something that you need to adjust as you go through and you learn more about how you respond to volume and different volumes at different intensities. A lot of that has to do with how much type 1 or type 2 muscle fiber you have. I'll take a break away to say this was the high point of my test. I was testing triples, kind of doing a triples mock meet, and worked up to 645 by 3. This was a 10-pound lifetime PR for triples, and I was really happy with how these moved. This was a great set for me, definitely really encouraging, and I really hope to bring this type of strength into the competition, to be this kind of deep into fatigue and still be able to do a set of 3 probably at RPE 9.5 or 9. Really excited about that. I then moved on to bench, did 425 for 3. I went up to 445 for 3, but slipped on the bench, clipped the rack, and just decided to call it so as not to injure myself. But this wasn't too difficult either. I was pretty happy with how these moved. This is the 425 here. So regardless, volume is one of those things that you want to pay attention to and track, but it's also something that can be very difficult to understand. For me, I have a lot of type 2 muscle fiber, or at least more than your average person. And so I can lift heavy weights, but when I do so, they fatigue me very quickly. And so I can't do a lot of volume with real heavy weights, but I can handle submaximal weights pretty well for a decent amount of volume because I've trained for that. So that's something for me personally that I know. Other people are the opposite. They can handle pretty heavy intensities pretty well, and even at higher volumes, and that's what they need to make progress. So I kind of voice over that. Conventional didn't have a lot of form breakdown, but it did tweak my back just a little bit. So I'm assuming I'm going to be back to normal training in a week, which will be about 2.5 weeks of submaximal deloaded training using really low intensities or just stretching, walking around, foam rolling. So that's what I got going on in the future. But I want to get back to the Christian ethics series. I am in an ethics class right now, and so I'm learning some different perspectives, specifically some Nazarene and Wesleyan perspectives on theological ethics. So for those of you who don't know, all Christians don't agree on how to interpret the Scriptures. Many of them have very different conclusions. Even though everybody's working from the same texts, there are different presuppositions that people bring to the text, and that changes how they read it. We get our presuppositions from all sorts of ways. The scope of this video is too small for me to discuss presuppositions in general, but suffice to say, I'm coming from a tradition that is Wesleyan in nature, which is to say it is Arminian in nature, as opposed to a Calvinistic standpoint. What that means for those of you who are not in the theological circles, Calvin believed that salvation is by faith alone, as did Arminius. However, Calvin believed that people could not choose to believe what was right about God. He believed that God had to choose them or to elect them, and if a person is elected, which is not based upon their merit or ability or how good or bad or whatever they are, it's just based upon God's will, that then they would be saved. Arminius takes a different perspective, and Wesley, John Wesley that is, the Anglican priest who started the Methodist movement, though that's a little unfair. He didn't really start, he was in what we call the Methodist movement, though John Wesley never wanted to break away from the Anglican Church. He was not into that sort of denominational splitting and fought pretty much his whole life to really reform the Anglican, which is the English Church. So anyways, that's just a little bit about him. It then, after his death, broke into the Methodist movement. Regardless, he believed that people were enabled by God to choose whether they would accept the gospel and accept Jesus Christ as Lord, or to reject it. Wesley didn't believe that God made anybody do anything or elected certain people without their participation in that process. He believed that God gave the ability to people to choose. And that is the theological tradition I find myself in. Now, on that note, I have these words up here, deontological and teleological. These are ethical terms, and I thought it was important to discuss these only because deontological comes from the Greek root duty, or kind of like duty is an obligation, and that you are bound to your duty and you have to perform it. In ethics, this means that there are certain laws or regulations or duties that must be carried out no matter what the context or circumstance. And so maybe that would be something, for example, say, do not lie. So if that's your duty, you can never lie, no matter what that means. And that might be a deontological view of ethics. Now, on the flip side, you have teleological. Teleological also is from a Greek root meaning end. Telos is the Greek word for end. And what this means is you have a goal or an end that you are striving towards and seeking to accomplish. And all of your decisions, all of the moral decisions that you make along the way are going to be characterized by whatever end you are trying to reach. And so there are these two competing views on how ethics ought to be understood or implemented. The danger of the teleological method is that you will end up justifying bad actions, justifying the means you use to reach the end you desire. And that's where you get that expression that the end justifies the means. So the end justifies the means is an expression that means you can do something bad if it creates a greater good. Now, a deontological view would never allow for that because your duty is all that matters. But the rigidity of your duty may actually lead you to do something bad. Classic example is if you were around in World War II and German officers in the SS come to your door and they're looking to see if you are hiding Jewish people in your house. Are you going to tell the truth because it's your duty to tell the truth and you shouldn't lie? And so turn these people over? Or is it okay to lie in a situation like that? Because the context is such that lying is appropriate. Well, that's an interesting sort of question. And ethicists have argued about those sorts of things for literally thousands of years. This dates way back to Plato and Aristotle. And so these are two different topics and ways of understanding Christian ethics as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but in general, the deontological view has the danger of lapsing into what's called legalism, where you just rigidly hold to lists of laws and rules and customs, whereas the teleological can have the issue of opening yourself up to relativistic behavior as you do your best to achieve a certain end. They both have benefits as well, and I'll probably be speaking more about that as I go through this class. The first book that I am reading that's kind of discussing some of these terms is called Reflecting the Divine Image, Christian Ethics in a Wesleyan Perspective, and it's written by H. Ray Dunning, if you're interested. It's a pretty short book. I found it very interesting, though others might find it dry and boring. That's just the way things are, I guess. But in any case, I'll be talking more about this. If you hung through the end of this rambling video, congratulations to you. And I hope wherever you're at, you're doing well. And I'm also hoping to have much better frequency and uploads of videos here. So apologize for some of the delays. I hope you're still out there watching somewhere. In any case, blessings.